June 22, 1944. Philippine Sea, midnight. The ocean lay dark and endless, a black mirror broken only by the faint glimmer of stars overhead. The Japanese convoy merchant freighters heavy with fuel and ammunition, escorted by destroyers, moved in tight formation. On the bridge of the flagship, Captain Hiroshi Tanaka scanned the night horizon, straining his eyes. For years, Japanese captains had trusted their vision and instinct. Radar, they believed, was crude, unreliable. Darkness was their ally. Tonight, they thought, they were invisible. But far below, hidden beneath the waves, a very different set of eyes was watching. 80 feet under the surface, in the cramped control room of the USS Harder, the air hummed with electricity. The green glow of a radar scope flickered as an operator whispered coordinates. On the sonar set, faint pings echoed through the headphones, bouncing off steel hulls above. Lieutenant Commander Sam Dealey leaned over the chart, his face lit by the dim red bulbs. Convoy bearing 020. Range, 8,000 yards. Escorts closing. They don't know we're here. The Americans had brought new weapons into the undersea war. Radar to see in the darkness, sonar to hear through the water. And with them, the balance had shifted. Captain Tanaka, unaware, still believed his convoy was safe. His destroyers swept the seas with searchlights, their crews peering into the black void. They could not imagine that the Americans were tracking every move, plotting every course. Japanese doctrine had long emphasized visual detection, sharp eyes, bright flares, listening posts. But against radar and sonar, the night itself betrayed them. Shortly after midnight, the first salvo came. Dealey ordered the torpedo doors open. Compressed air hissed, and steel fish raced silently through the water. Seconds later, explosions tore into the lid freighter. Flames leapt skyward, turning night into day. Japanese sailors screamed as the ship split open, its cargo erupting in fire. The destroyers scrambled, dropping depth charges blindly into the sea. But the Harder was already gone, slipping into the dark, guided by sonar echoes and radar sweeps. For the Japanese captains, it was bewildering. How had the Americans known where they were? How could they strike so precisely in the dead of night? Captain Tanaka wrote in his report, "The enemy saw us in complete darkness. Their weapons came from nowhere. We were blind." This was the revolution of technology at sea. In 1942, Japanese convoys had still moved with confidence. American submarines struggled, their torpedoes often defective, their crews inexperienced. Losses were minimal, but by 1944, the tide had turned. Radar allowed submarines to hunt even on the surface at night, closing on convoys without being seen. Sonar let them dodge escorts and track targets through layers of water. The Pacific had become a killing ground, and the Japanese merchant fleet was its prey. In the cramped quarters of U.S. submarines, sailors grew used to the hum of radar, the steady ping of sonar, the whispered reports of bearings and ranges. They trusted the instruments as much as their eyes. Ensign Robert Hayes recalled his first patrol. "I kept expecting the enemy to spot us, but the radar showed them long before they knew we were there. It felt like we had stolen their sight." For Japanese captains, the shock was existential. Their empire depended on convoys, oil from the East Indies or from Malaya, food from China. Without them, industry starved and fleets withered. But now, every voyage carried the specter of invisible hunters. Submarines guided by unseen machines. One diary from a Japanese destroyer officer captured the dread. "We sweep the horizon with lights. We listen to the sea. Nothing. Then explosions. Ships vanish. The Americans see through the dark. We fight blind." By dawn, Tanaka's convoy had lost 3 freighters. Survivors clung to wreckage as the rest limped toward port. The destroyers expended hundreds of depth charges but struck only empty water. Below them, the Harder slipped away, unscathed, its crew already plotting the next ambush. Captain Dealey scribbled into his log before allowing his men a few hours' rest. "Radar and sonar. The night belongs to us now. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Your support keeps these stories of World War II alive, preserving the voices of those who fought above and below the waves. July 10, 1944. South China Sea. A convoy of Japanese transports crept northward under the glare of a pale moon. On the bridges of destroyer escorts, officers barked orders to maintain zigzag courses. Lookouts strained their eyes against the horizon, searching for silhouettes of submarines. The men felt uneasy. They had heard the stories, the convoys that vanished, the ships that erupted in flame without warning. But doctrine still told them that vigilance and courage could keep them safe. What they could not see was that death was already waiting below. 80 feet beneath the swells, the USS Seahorse tracked them silently. The radar mast, extended above the surface, pulsed invisible beams across the sea. On the glowing scope, blips appeared, ships moving slowly in formation. The submarine sonar operator, headphones clamped tight, picked up faint propeller beats. Multiple contacts. Escorts in close. Target steady. Lieutenant Commander Slade Cutter leaned over the chart table. His finger traced the convoy's path. His jaw set. They'll never see us coming. At 2 o'clock, the Seahorse rose to periscope depth. Through the lens, Cutter saw the convoy fat transports silhouetted against the moon, destroyers cutting nervous wakes around them. He gave the order. Torpedo tubes flooded. Seconds later, steel fish streaked forward, their wakes invisible in the night. The first blast tore through an ammunition ship. The explosion lit the sky like lightning, hurling debris 1,000 feet into the air. Japanese sailors screamed as fire cascaded down onto the decks. 2 more freighters erupted in flame. Chaos followed. Escorts charged wildly, dropping depth charges that thundered through the water. But the Seahorse was already gone, slipping beneath the thermal layer, sonar guiding her away from danger. On the surface, Japanese officers were stunned. They had not seen a periscope. No aircraft had shadowed them. The attack had come from nowhere, in the dead of night, with impossible precision. One destroyer captain shouted over the radio, "The Americans can see in the dark. They know where we are." He was right. Radar gave U.S. submarines the ability to stalk convoys at night, something no Navy had achieved before on such a scale. Combined with sonar, which allowed them to track escorts and evade counterattacks, the balance of power shifted entirely. Japanese doctrine, rooted in visual detection and aggressive escort tactics, collapsed under the strain. Searchlights and star shells illuminated only empty seas. Depth charges rumbled harmlessly in the darkness. The hunters had become prey, blind and furious. By summer 1944, the results were catastrophic. In that single month, American submarines sank more than 500,000 tons of Japanese shipping. Tankers carrying oil from the Dutch East Indies, freighters loaded with ore, transports ferrying troops, all vanished beneath the waves. Each loss starved Japan's factories, grounded its aircraft, and left its soldiers undersupplied across the Pacific. German observers attached to the Japanese Navy reported their disbelief. One wrote to Berlin, "Their convoys are slaughtered. The enemy has devices to see through darkness and water. Our allies do not understand this kind of war." For Japanese sailors, the psychological toll deepened with each voyage. Diaries described men trembling at every sonar ping, every unexplained ripple in the sea. "We wait for death we cannot see," one wrote. "Every night is terror. Every shadow is a submarine." In Tokyo, naval officers struggled to explain the losses. They blamed poor seamanship, bad luck, even treachery. But privately, some admitted the truth. American technology had leapt ahead. One admiral confided, "Our eyes are closed. The enemy's eyes are open." On the submarines themselves, the mood was grim but resolute. Crews endured claustrophobic patrols, stale air, and constant danger, yet they trusted their machines. Ensign Robert Hayes described the feeling. "Radar showed us the targets before they knew we were there. Sonar told us where the escorts were. It was like fighting an enemy blindfolded while we had night vision. Attacks became bolder." Submarines surfaced at night to use radar, closing within a mile of convoys before diving to strike. Others coordinated wolf packs, each boat guided by radar contacts, striking from multiple directions at once. Entire convoys disappeared in single nights. For Japanese captains, the nightmare grew with every loss. Captain Hiroshi Tanaka, who had survived the June ambush, wrote bitterly after another attack. "Our ships vanish as if the sea itself devours them. The enemy is unseen, untouchable. We are powerless." By the autumn of 1944, Japan's merchant fleet was in ruins. More than half its tonnage lay at the bottom of the Pacific. Fuel shortages crippled the Navy. Soldiers stranded in outposts starved as supply lines collapsed. Submarines armed with radar and sonar had achieved what bombing raids and surface fleets could not: the slow strangulation of an empire. American sailors did not celebrate lightly. They knew each torpedo meant hundreds of men drowning in the dark. But they also knew their mission was decisive. Commander Cutter told his crew after one patrol, "Every ship we sink is another plane that cannot fly, another tank that cannot move. We are cutting the lifeline of Japan." The Japanese sailors, trapped in convoys that had become floating targets, understood the same truth. They faced not just an enemy, but an inevitability. November 20th, 1944. South of Formosa. A cold drizzle swept across the decks of a Japanese convoy steaming north, its freighters heavy with oil desperately needed by the home islands. On the bridge of the destroyer Kuwa, Captain Masayoshi Sato gripped his binoculars, scanning the horizon. His orders were clear: protect the tankers at all costs. Yet he knew the truth: too many ships had already vanished in recent months. Too many convoys had been erased in the dark by unseen hunters. At dusk, he reassured his men. The escorts would remain vigilant. Searchlights were ready. Lookouts were doubled. But what no Japanese officer could control was the technology arrayed against them. Beneath the surface, the USS Celian tracked the convoy, her radar mast raised just above the waves, sweeping invisible beams across the sea. Each blip on the green screen told the Americans where the convoy was, how fast it moved, and how close the escorts pressed. Inside the submarine, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Sonar pings echoed through headphones as the operator whispered, "Multiple targets. Tankers. Large displacement. Escorts weaving." Lieutenant Commander Eli Ricks smiled grimly. "This is it, boys. Tankers full of oil. Let's cut their throat." At 21:30, the Celian rose to periscope depth. Reich scanned the convoy shadows on the horizon, the faint silhouettes of tankers plowing forward, destroyers darting nervously around them. He gave the order: fire a spread of 6 torpedoes. Seconds later, the sea erupted. 2 tankers vanished in towering columns of fire, their cargo igniting the night. Flames lit the clouds overhead, turning the drizzle into a rain of sparks. On the bridges of surviving ships, Japanese sailors froze in horror. One officer shouted, "No planes, no flares. Where did it come from?" The answer was below, silent and unseen, guided by radar and sonar. Destroyers charged, dropping depth charges in frantic patterns. Explosions thundered through the water, rattling the Celian's hull. Lights flickered, men clutched rails, sweat dripping despite the cold. Yet Reich kept his calm. Using sonar, the crew tracked the escorts' paths, maneuvering into thermal layers that masked their position. The destroyers hunted blindly, their crews convinced the submarine had slipped away in another direction. By dawn, 3 tankers and 1 freighter lay burning or sunk. The survivors limped into port, their escorts exhausted and demoralized. Captain Sato recorded in his log, "The enemy strikes as though guided by demons. We cannot see them, we cannot stop them. The ocean itself is against us." This was not an isolated event. By late 1944, American submarines had perfected their deadly craft. Radar gave them the advantage of surprise. Sonar gave them survival against counterattack. Convoys that once felt safe under cover of night were annihilated with merciless efficiency. The scale was immense. In November alone, U.S. submarines sank more than 400,000 tons of Japanese shipping. Tankers carrying oil from Borneo, freighters with food for Tokyo, transports carrying soldiers to the Philippines, all were lost. By year's end, Japan's merchant fleet had been cut by more than half. For the Japanese captains, the shock was existential. Diaries captured their despair. One freighter officer wrote, "Every night we steam forward, every night we expect death. The enemy knows where we are, even in blackness. We are lambs led to slaughter." In Tokyo, naval staff struggled to explain the disaster. They clung to outdated assumptions, poor escort tactics, insufficient discipline. But reports from the front told another story. The Americans had machines that rendered darkness meaningless. A captured Japanese officer put it bluntly, "Your submarines have eyes where we have none." On the American side, morale soared. Sailors endured heat, cramped quarters, and the constant threat of death, but they trusted their technology. Ensign Robert Hayes recalled, "Radar gave us the courage to surface at night. Sonar gave us the confidence to escape their hunters. We felt like we could see through the ocean itself." Wolf packs amplified the devastation. Multiple submarines coordinated by radio, each guided by radar, struck convoys from different angles. Japanese destroyers, already stretched thin, could not defend against simultaneous attacks. Survivors described the sea itself exploding around them, ships burning on every side, panic overwhelming any chance of organized defense. By December, oil shipments from the East Indies had collapsed. Refineries in Japan ran dry. Aircraft sat idle on airfields. Warships were stranded at anchor, unable to sortie for lack of fuel. American submarines, fewer than 200 boats in total, had strangled an empire. Yet the human side was equally stark. Japanese sailors described nights of terror, ears ringing from the constant shriek of alarms, nerves shattered by every sonar ping. Some convoys lost half their ships in a single night. Survivors clung to wreckage, watching flames stretch across the horizon. One diary ended with a chilling line, "If the sea is our ally, then why does it betray us? We fight ghosts we cannot touch." American submariners knew the war was brutal. Commander Reich confessed years later, "Every time we sank a ship, I thought of the men in the water. But I also thought of our boys on Saipan and Guam, fighting and dying. If we cut off Japan's lifeline, maybe we saved them." By the end of 1944, Japanese captains no longer spoke of strategy. They spoke only of survival. Convoy duty became a death sentence, a march into darkness where radar and sonar stripped them of hope. March 1945, the East China Sea. A convoy of 8 Japanese freighters pushed northward, their decks stacked with crates of food and barrels of oil. Escort destroyers prowled nervously on the flanks, searchlights ready, crews tense. On the bridge of the lead destroyer, Captain Shigeru Matsuda studied the horizon, jaw clenched. Every officer in the Imperial Navy knew the truth by now. The ocean was no longer theirs. Convoys were not voyages but wagers, and the stakes were life or death. At 1:40, the wager was lost. From the depths, the USS Balo rose to periscope depth. Its radar had tracked the convoy hours before, guiding it into perfect position. In the control room, sailors whispered bearings, their faces pale in the red glow. The sonar operator muttered, "2 escorts, range closing." Targets lined up. Commander John Dempsey gave the order. Tubes 1 through 6 fired. Moments later, the night erupted. A freighter exploded in a plume of flame, splitting in two. Another staggered, listing hard to port, smoke gushing from its decks. Japanese sailors screamed as fire leapt across the waves. Panic spread through the convoy. Destroyers surged forward, depth charges hammering the water. But the Bala had already slipped away, sonar guiding it beneath a thermal layer, out of reach. Captain Matsuda shouted for counterattacks, but his men were deafened by their own explosives. Hours passed, depth charges wasted, while more torpedoes struck. By dawn, 4 freighters were gone, 2 more crippled. The survivors limped toward port. Matsuda scribbled in his report, "The enemy attacks in darkness as if guided by gods. We fight blind." Blind, that was the word repeated across countless Japanese logs and diaries in 1945. Radar gave American submarines eyes at night. Sonar gave them ears beneath the waves. Convoys that once trusted the cover of darkness now found it meaningless. Japanese officers who had grown up believing in the power of discipline, courage, and sharp vision discovered that no amount of vigilance could overcome machines that saw what human senses could not. By spring 1945, the effect was catastrophic. Japan's merchant fleet, once over 6 million tons, had been reduced to barely 1 million. Tankers carrying oil from the Dutch East Indies were gone. Food shipments from China dwindled to nothing. Mines sat idle for lack of ore. In Tokyo, factories fell silent, aircraft grounded, ships rusting in port. An empire built on supply lines had been strangled by fewer than 200 American submarines. The statistics alone told the story. Submarines made up less than 2% of the U.S. Navy, yet they sank over 55% of all Japanese ships lost in the war. Convoy after convoy disappeared. By April, more than 9 out of 10 Japanese merchant ships sent to sea never returned. But beyond numbers, the human toll was staggering. Survivors of convoys described nights of terror listening for the shriek of torpedoes, the thunder of explosions, the desperate cries of men in the water. One diary, recovered from a sunken freighter, read, "We sailed knowing we were already dead. The sea is full of ghosts now." For American crews, the war beneath the sea was claustrophobic, relentless, and unforgiving. The air inside submarines grew foul on long patrols. Depth charge attacks shook the hull, bolts rattling loose, pipes leaking. Yet sailors endured, driven by the knowledge that each sinking hastened the end. Lieutenant Robert Hayes remembered one night. "We listened on sonar as escorts searched above us. Every ping was a heartbeat. But when we surfaced at dawn and saw the smoke of burning ships, we knew it was worth it." Wolf packs increased the devastation. Multiple submarines, coordinated by radar reports, closed in on convoys, attacking from every angle. Japanese escorts, already few, could not cover all approaches. Survivors later described the sea itself as exploding, with torpedoes striking from left, right, and behind. One Japanese officer said, "It was like being attacked by shadows. No matter where we turned, they were there." The desperation in Tokyo deepened. Admirals demanded tighter convoys, more escorts. But fuel shortages crippled destroyers and air cover was scarce. As the U.S. advanced across the Pacific, airfields on Saipan, Guam, and the Philippines extended the reach of patrols, ensuring that no Japanese convoy was safe. In the final months of the war, Japan's Navy had warships it could not move and planes it could not fuel. The empire starved not from bombing alone, but from the silent hunters beneath the waves. Radar and sonar had turned the Pacific into an American battlefield. Captain Matsuda survived until May, when his last convoy was annihilated in the East China Sea. In his final report, never delivered before the surrender, he wrote, "We sail blind into a night the enemy controls. Their machines see everything. Our courage means nothing. The ocean, once our ally, has betrayed us." For American sailors, victory carried its own weight. Commander Dempsey reflected years later, "We knew we were killing thousands of men we never saw. But we also knew every tanker sunk meant fewer planes over Iwo Jima, fewer supplies reaching Okinawa, fewer of our boys dying on the beaches." By August 1945, when Japan surrendered, its merchant fleet was virtually gone. The empire could no longer feed itself, fuel itself, or fight. Submarines, equipped with radar and sonar, had cut its arteries. Historians would later call it one of the most decisive campaigns of the war, achieved not with great fleets or armies, but with unseen hunters striking in the night. The Japanese captains, once proud of their seamanship, were left stunned. They had been outmaneuvered not by bravery, but by technology. Their convoys had become graveyards, their sailors lost to an enemy they could scarcely perceive. The lesson was bitter, but clear. In modern war, machines could strip even the most disciplined crews of their advantage. If you've stayed with us until the end, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment. Your support keeps these stories of World War II alive, honoring both the courage of those who fought and the lessons that history must never let us forget.